Some men show their power by cutting in line. Some men do it by making sure the person behind them knows exactly who they cut in front of. Vincent Hale grabbed my daughter's wrist in the parking lot of a Whole Foods in Buckhead, Atlanta, on a Saturday morning in March, and twisted it hard enough to leave a bruise, because she had accidentally bumped his cart with hers. He was 41 years old, worth somewhere north of $300 million according to the Atlanta Business Chronicle, and he looked at her the way men who have never been told no look at anyone they consider beneath them. Then he got in his Range Rover and drove away. My daughter called me from the parking lot, sitting on the curb next to her groceries, with her wrist wrapped in her other hand. She was 29 years old. She was 8 months pregnant. Welcome to Dad's Calm Revenge. My name is Roy Callum. I am 58 years old. I spent 22 years as a criminal defense attorney in Atlanta before moving to the district attorney's office, where I have prosecuted white-collar crime for the last 11 years. I drink my coffee black. I do not raise my voice in courtrooms, because I have found that quiet is more frightening than loud, and I am told by the people who work with me that I am, professionally speaking, the most patient man they have ever met. I want to be honest with you about what patience feels like from the inside when someone puts their hands on your child. It does not feel like a virtue. It feels like a lid on something very hot. Let me tell you about my daughter first, because you need to understand what kind of person we are talking about before you understand what happened next. My daughter is Nora. She has been a third-grade teacher at Brookfield Elementary in Decatur for 6 years. She goes in early and stays late. She buys supplies out of her own pocket, which is a sentence every parent of a teacher has said, and which never stops being a quiet outrage. She is the kind of person who remembers her students' birthdays, who notices when a kid hasn't eaten, who has driven children home herself, because the bus situation was complicated, and she was not willing to let an 8-year-old figure it out alone. She is also, as of that March morning, 8 months pregnant with her first child, a girl. She and her husband, my son-in-law Terrence, had already named her Lily. The nursery was pale yellow. The name was in script letters above the crib that Terrence had assembled himself over a long weekend with the focused determination of a man who wanted to get at least one thing perfect before his daughter arrived. I did not know yet that a man I had never met was about to put his hands on my family and leave a mark that was, in the end, the worst mistake of his professional life. Nora called me at 11:14 on a Saturday morning. I was in my study going through case files, because that is what I do on Saturday mornings. My wife, Patsy, says I am incapable of a weekend, and she is correct. Nora's voice when I picked up was doing the specific thing that Nora's voice does when she is trying not to fall apart. She has been doing it since she was 6 years old. She holds each word carefully, like she is carrying something breakable. Dad, she said. Hey, are you busy? I closed the file. What happened? I'm okay. Lily's okay. I just wanted you to know that before I said anything else. I was already standing. Nora, I'm in the Whole Foods parking lot on Peachtree. I bumped someone's cart by accident. A breath. He grabbed my wrist, Dad. Hard. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed it and twisted and looked at me like I was something in his way. Then he left. I stood very still in my study for a moment. Did anyone see? 2 women near the entrance. They came over after. One of them called the police. There's an officer here now taking a report. Good, I said. Let them finish. Do not leave until they're done. Dad, you're being very calm. I know. It's the calm that worries me. Stay with the officer, Nora. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I arrived in 18. Nora was still on the curb. A police officer crouching beside her. One of the witnesses standing nearby with her phone in her hand. The bruise on Nora's wrist was the kind that doesn't look like much in the moment and looks much worse the next morning. Lily's heartbeat, confirmed later at the OB-GYN urgent care, was fine. Nora was fine. The wrist was not broken. These are the facts I held on to in the car on the way home, while Patsy sat in the back with Nora and I drove and did not say very much at all. Patsy knows what my silence sounds like when it is working on something. She did not try to fill it. The officer had taken a full report. There were 2 witnesses. There was parking lot security footage. The officer had run the plate on the Range Rover, which was registered to a leasing company, which would require a subpoena to trace further. His name, one of the witnesses had recognized him from a charity gala she had attended the previous fall, was Vincent Hale. I had heard the name. Vincent Hale was the founder and CEO of Hale Property Group, one of the largest commercial real estate development firms in Atlanta. He had built his company over 15 years from a mid-sized residential operation into something with a footprint across 6 states. He was known in Atlanta business circles as relentless, well-connected, and entirely comfortable in rooms where the decisions were made before the meeting started. He was also, I discovered when I got home and pulled what I could from public sources, currently in the middle of a federal real estate fraud investigation that had been generating quiet attention in financial crime circles for the better part of a year. I had heard about the investigation through the specific channels that people in my position hear about things, professionally adjacent conversations, mentions at conferences, a phone call with a colleague at the FBI field office in Atlanta 6 months earlier that had not been specific, but had been indicative. I had not been involved. The case was federal, not state, and it sat in a different jurisdiction entirely. Until that Saturday afternoon, it had been none of my professional business. I sat in my study after dinner. Patsy had taken Nora upstairs. Terrence had arrived and was sitting with his wife in the way that good men sit, in the way that good men sit with their wives, after something has happened to them. Present, quiet, doing the work of being there without making it about himself. I liked Terrence from the day I met him. I liked him more that evening. I pulled what I could on Hale Property Group from public records. The federal investigation, pieced together from court filings, news coverage, and professional sources I am not going to name here, centered on allegations that Vincent Hale had systematically misrepresented the environmental status of commercial properties. His firm was developing across Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Specifically, the allegation was that Hale Property Group had obtained environmental clearance certificates that were, at minimum, incomplete, and had used those certificates to secure financing, attract investors, and close deals on properties that had known contamination issues the company had documented internally and chosen not to disclose. The potential liability, civil and criminal, was substantial. The investigation had been active for 14 months. A grand jury in the Northern District of Georgia had been convened. The case was moving. His legal team, 3 partners from a firm on Peachtree that charged rates I am familiar with from the other side, had been filing motions and managing the timeline with the precision of people who understood that their client's freedom was a matter of calendar management as much as law. I closed my laptop at 10:30 and sat in the dark for a few minutes. Then I called a man named Cal Withers. Cal had been with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Atlanta for 17 years. We had worked cases together, going back to my defense days, which is a specific kind of professional relationship, built on mutual respect and the understanding that each of us, at various points, had information the other needed, and that the currency was trust rather than favor. I called him on his personal phone, which he picked up on the 3rd ring. "Roy," he said. "Everything all right?" "Not entirely," I said. "Tell me what you know about Vincent Hale." A pause. "That's a name I can't discuss in detail right now, as you probably know." "I know," I said. "My daughter is 8 months pregnant. She was in a parking lot this morning in Buckhead. She bumped someone's cart by accident. The man grabbed her wrist and twisted it hard enough to leave a bruise. He walked away without a word. The officer who took the report ran the plate. The car traced to a leasing company. A very long pause. "Roy, she's fine. Lily's fine. I wanted you to know in case it became relevant to anything you might be working on." Another pause. "Is she filing charges?" "The report has been filed. Battery. Whether the DA's office pursues it is above my pay grade at the moment, given that it involves my daughter, but the report exists, the witnesses exist, and the footage exists." "I see," Cal said. He was quiet for a moment. "How detailed is the footage?" "I'm told the camera is positioned at the parking lot entrance and covers the cart return area directly." The officer described it as clear. "Roy," Cal said slowly, "I want to be careful here. I want to be very careful here." "So do I said. "I'm not calling you to ask for anything improper. I'm calling you because you are a friend and something happened to my family today and I wanted you to know." "I understand that." A pause. "How is Nora?" She's managing. She's strong. And you? I'm fine, Cal. You don't sound fine. I'm patient, I said. That's not the same thing. On Monday morning, I did 3 things. First, I documented the bruise. Nora's OB had photographed it at the urgent care visit Saturday afternoon. But I asked her to return Monday for updated photographs showing the progression, which is relevant in battery cases because bruising often looks worse on days 2 and 3 than it does initially. Nora agreed, without my having to explain my reasoning. Because Nora knows how I think, and because she was by Monday morning considerably more angry than she had been on Saturday. Second, I contacted the Whole Foods corporate security office and formally requested preservation of the parking lot footage from Saturday morning under a litigation hold notice. I sent the request on DA's office letterhead, which is not improper given that a crime report had been filed, and which has a clarifying effect on how quickly corporate security departments respond to documentation requests. The footage was confirmed preserved by Tuesday afternoon. Third, I called my colleague Sandra Oakes, who heads the intake division of our office and to whom all new case referrals flow. I told her that I had a personal conflict of interest with respect to a potential battery case involving a complainant who was my daughter, and that I was disclosing that conflict formally and in writing, and that any decision about whether to pursue the matter would need to be made entirely without my involvement. Sandra is 53, has been in the DA's office for 19 years, and has the specific quality of someone who has heard everything and remains surprised by very little. She listened to what I told her without interrupting. The victim is your daughter, she said. Yes, 8 months pregnant at the time of the incident. Yes. And there's footage. Clear footage, 2 independent witnesses, and a filed police report. A pause. Roy, are you going to tell me who the alleged perpetrator is? I told her. Sandra was quiet for a moment. That name is in the news in connection with a federal investigation. I'm aware of that, I said. I'm disclosing the conflict because it would be improper for me to have any involvement in a case touching someone with whom I have a personal grievance. I wanted it on record immediately. Understood, Sandra said. She paused again. How is your daughter? She's fine. Angry, which I think is appropriate. Good for her, Sandra said. Leave this with me. I left it with her. What I did not leave with her, because it was not mine to disclose, was the information I already had from public sources about the federal investigation. That information was publicly available. It was not a secret. It was also not, in my professional judgment, irrelevant to the question of who Vincent Hale was and how he operated in the world. Men who grab pregnant women in parking lots are not, in my experience, experiencing their first moment of believing that consequences do not apply to them. They are expressing a habit. The footage went public on a Wednesday. I did not release it. Let me be clear about that, because clarity matters here. The police report was a public document. The Whole Foods parking lot camera footage had been preserved pursuant to a litigation hold and was referenced in that public report. A journalist named Caro Fielding, who covers criminal justice for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, had been tracking the Hale Property Group federal investigation for several months and had, through her own entirely independent research, become aware that a battery report had been filed against Vincent Hale. She requested the footage through a public records request to the Atlanta Police Department. The APD processed the request pursuant to standard procedure. I am aware of all of this because Caro called me on Tuesday to ask whether I had any comment as the father of the victim. I told her that I had a professional conflict of interest, that I had formally recused myself from any involvement in the case, and that she should direct any further questions to the DA's Public Affairs Office. She thanked me and published her story Wednesday morning. I will not describe in detail what 37 seconds of clear parking lot footage looks like when it shows a man in a $2,000 jacket grabbing a visibly pregnant woman's wrist in a Whole Foods parking lot in broad daylight. You can imagine it. The internet's response to the footage was approximately what you would expect from footage of that description. Within 6 hours, it had been viewed 4 million times. By Thursday morning, it was national news. Vincent Hale's PR firm issued a statement describing the incident as a misunderstanding involving unintentional physical contact during a stressful moment. The statement used the phrase unintentional physical contact to describe something captured in high definition from two angles. The internet, as it does, responded to the phrase with a specificity of contempt that I found, privately, satisfying. What happened next was the part that even I had not fully anticipated, though I should have. Men who operate the way Vincent Hale operated do not exist in isolation. They leave trails. They leave employees who remember things. They leave former business partners who had been waiting for someone to turn on the lights. Nut. Within 48 hours of the footage going public, a former Hale Property Group project manager named Dennis Alworth gave an interview to Caro Fielding, describing a culture of intimidation at the firm so normalized that no one had questioned it, because questioning it meant consequences, and consequences from Vincent Hale had historically been swift and personal. 3 other former employees came forward to the AJC within the week. 2 women described incidents that HR had processed quietly and efficiently, which is to say in ways that protected the company and not them. A former contractor described being physically removed from a meeting by Hale himself after asking a question about an environmental report that Hale did not want discussed. The picture that assembled itself in public was not of an isolated moment in a parking lot. It was of a temperament, a pattern, a man who had spent 15 years building a world in which his comfort was the primary variable and everyone else's dignity was optional. Cal called me Thursday evening. The task force has been in contact with the DA's office, he said. Sandra Oaks mentioned your name. She would have mentioned it to explain why I'm not involved. She did, Cal said. Roy. Cal. There are additional matters now under review that were not under review a week ago. I was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, in the tone of a man who is not sorry at all. The footage, Cal said, created what I would describe as a visibility event. I imagine it did. The kind of event that makes certain witnesses reconsider their earlier decision not to cooperate. Reluctant witnesses are a common feature of complex investigations, I said. When the social cost of silence exceeds the perceived risk of speaking, they tend to become less reluctant. You know that's true. I do. A pause. How is Nora? She had her 36-week appointment yesterday. Lily looks good. Good, Cal said, and then very carefully, how are you? I'm fine, I said. I'm patient. Sandra called me the following Tuesday. We're moving forward on the battery charge, she said. I want you to know so it doesn't come as a surprise, and I want to be clear that this decision was made entirely on the merits of the evidence by people with no personal connection to the case. I know that, I said. The footage is unambiguous, the medical documentation is solid, the witnesses are credible, and the victim is willing to testify, Sandra said. That's a straightforward case. Yes, I said. It is. She paused. His lawyers are already calling. They want to discuss a resolution. I'm sure they do. They've used the phrase good faith engagement twice. That phrase usually means they want to pay for the problem to go away. It does, Sandra said. It also means they're worried. Good, I said. The battery case was handled by an assistant DA named Marcus Webb, who was 34 years old, had grown up in College Park, and prosecuted crimes against women, with the focused attention of a man who had watched, from close range, what happened when those crimes were minimized. He was meticulous, patient, and, from everything I heard secondhand, gave Vincent Hale's legal team absolutely nothing that they had not earned through the formal process. I had no contact with Marcus on the case. I followed it, the way any father follows a legal proceeding involving his child, through what Nora told me, through public filings, and through the things you simply know when you have spent 30 years in the system. I was at home with Patsy on a Tuesday in April when Terrence called from the courthouse. Nora had not wanted me there. She said it would be too complicated, which was her way of saying that she wanted to do this part herself. I respected that completely. Roy, Terrence said. Hey, a breath. He pled guilty. I sat down. I had not been sitting before. Assault and battery, Terrence said. No plea deal on the charges, just an agreed sentencing recommendation. The judge accepted it. What's the recommendation? 18 months probation. Mandatory anger management. A fine that I'm told is the maximum for the offense class. Is Nora there? She's right here. A pause and then Nora's voice clear and level. Dad. Hey, sweetheart. He stood up and pled guilty in a courtroom, she said. In front of people, he said the words. Good, I said. I did not say anything else for a moment. How do you feel? Like I'm going to have a baby very soon and I want to go home, she said. She laughed a little, and also satisfied. Is that okay? Very okay, I said. Go home, I'll make dinner. You're going to make dinner? I'll order dinner, I said. From the Italian place. That's what I thought. The Hale Property Group federal case went to trial in October. Vincent Hale had entered the criminal justice system twice in 8 months. Once through a parking lot in Buckhead, and once through a federal grand jury, and the two proceedings, while entirely separate, had the cumulative effect on his public profile of a man who had become impossible to defend in a simple sentence. The federal trial was the larger case by every measure. The prosecution was led by an assistant U.S. attorney named Felicia Drum, who was 46 years old, had spent her career in environmental and financial crime, and had the specific quality of a person who had been handed exactly the kind of case she had been waiting 15 years to prosecute. The evidence was the evidence it had always been. The internal documents showing that Hale Property Group's own environmental consultants had flagged contamination issues that the company had chosen to classify as manageable rather than disclose. The financing agreements that referenced environmental clearances, which, in 3 cases, had been signed by a consultant who had not visited the properties he certified. The investor communications that described the development pipeline in terms that bore no relationship to the internal assessments of those same properties. And then there was the additional dimension that the parking lot footage had created. The 10 reluctant witnesses who had become, in the months after the visibility event, considerably less reluctant. 2 of them were former Hale Property Group employees who had direct knowledge of specific transactions under indictment. Their testimony, I am told by people who attended the proceedings as members of the public, was detailed, consistent, and, on at least 2 occasions, visibly difficult for Vincent Hale to sit through. His legal team argued everything available to them. They challenged the environmental methodology. They attacked the consultant's credentials. They argued that the investor communications reflected good faith projections, not intentional misrepresentation. Judge Deborah Crane, who had been on the federal bench for 16 years and had grown up in Macon, Georgia, ran the proceeding with the efficiency of someone who had heard every argument and was interested in substance rather than theater. The jury deliberated for 3 days. I was at home when Cal called. Lily was asleep in the bassinet in the living room. She had arrived on a Sunday in late April, 6 pounds 11 ounces, Nora's forehead, Terrence's chin, and an expression of profound skepticism about the world that I recognized from Nora's baby photos, and found, in Lily, immediately and deeply charming. She was asleep in the living room in the way that new babies are asleep, completely, as if sleep is not rest but occupation. Nora was in the kitchen. Terrence had taken the dog for a walk. Roy, Cal said. Guilty, all counts. I held the phone for a moment. Thank you, Cal. You weren't in that courtroom. No. You had nothing to do with this outcome. I had nothing to do with this outcome, I said. I recused myself from any involvement the Monday after the incident. Everything that followed was the natural consequence of a man who had spent 15 years committing serious crimes being properly investigated, properly prosecuted, and properly adjudicated. Cal was quiet for a moment. You've been practicing that sentence. For a while, yes. He laughed. Vincent Hale was sentenced on a Friday in December. Judge Crane sentenced him to 14 years in federal prison on the environmental fraud and securities charges, plus an additional 4 years on the obstruction count related to the destruction of internal documents that had occurred, according to the prosecution's timeline, in the 72 hours after the battery guilty plea became public. 18 years. Vincent Hale is 41 years old. Hale Property Group had already dissolved by the time of sentencing. The board had separated from Hale in May after the battery plea, and the firm had spent the summer and fall unwinding positions, managing creditors, and conducting the kind of orderly dissolution that expensive lawyers and accountants make possible when the alternative is disorderly dissolution. The properties under investigation were placed under various forms of regulatory review. The investors, who had been defrauded, formed, through their attorneys, a recovery group that was pursuing civil claims against the estate of the company. Nora filed a civil suit against Vincent Hale personal e-casting, through her own attorney, for damages related to the battery. The suit settled in August for an amount that Nora has not disclosed to me in detail, which I respect, and which her attorney described to Terence as appropriate to the circumstances. The settlement included a formal acknowledgement of the assault in writing, signed by Hale, which Nora kept. I asked her once why that mattered to her. She said because he has to have it in a document somewhere that he did it. He can't just say it didn't happen. That is my daughter. Dennis Alworth, the project manager who gave the first interview, received whistleblower protections and cooperated fully with the federal investigation. He was, according to Caro Fielding's follow-up reporting, in the process of starting his own environmental consulting firm. Two of the female former employees who came forward after the footage went public filed their own civil claims. Those proceedings are ongoing, and I will not speculate about their outcomes. Caro Fielding won an award for her coverage of the case. I sent her a note of congratulations. She replied with a message that said simply, "Tell Nora and Lily I said hello." Cal came to dinner on a Sunday in January. He brought a bottle of Bordeaux and spent 40 minutes on the living room floor with Lily, who regarded him with the measured assessment of a 9-month-old who has opinions about strangers and has not yet decided about Cal. She eventually, after due deliberation, smiled at him. "She's got your eyes," Cal said. "She's got Nora's eyes," I said. "They're the same eyes." "Nora got them from you," Patsy said from the kitchen. Cal smiled. We ate dinner. Lily fell asleep in the bassinet in the corner, her small hands curled beside her face in the way that new humans hold themselves, as if they are still getting used to the idea of all this space. After dinner, Cal poured another glass and looked at me across the table for a moment. "You know," he said, "when you called me that Saturday night, I thought you were going to ask me for something I couldn't give you." "I know you did. I was going to say no. I know that too. You didn't ask." "I didn't ask," I said, "because what I needed didn't require asking for anything I wasn't entitled to. It required patience, documentation, and the understanding that a man who grabs a pregnant woman in a parking lot in front of a security camera has already made every decision that matters." Cal swirled his wine. "You're very calm about all of it." "I am calm about all of it." "Are you, actually?" I thought about this, about the parking lot, about the bruise, about driving home that Saturday with Patsy and Nora in the car, and not saying anything because there was nothing useful to say out loud yet, about sitting in my study that night pulling public records and understanding, with the quiet clarity that comes from 30 years of doing exactly this work, exactly what I was looking at. "No," I said, "not entirely, but everything I did with what I felt, I could do in daylight with my name on it in writing." Cal nodded. "That's the job," Yacht said. "That's the job," I agreed. "There is a moment in every case, and I have been on both sides of enough of them to know this from every angle, when the weight of what a person has done finally lands on them in full. Not the legal weight, the human weight, the moment when the room stops moving in their favor and they understand, maybe for the first time in a very long time, that the world was not actually built around their convenience. I was not in that courtroom when Vincent Hale heard guilty on all counts. Nora was not there either. She was at home with Lily and Terence, doing what people with 9-month-olds do on a Thursday, which is manage, recover, and love someone who does not yet know what she costs them and will someday understand completely. But Caro Fielding was there. She told me about it over the phone the afternoon of the verdict, matter-of-factly, the way journalists describe things that belong to the public record. "He had sat very still," she said, when the foreman spoke. $300 million. 15 years of building something. 15 years of rooms that rearranged themselves around him. And then one Saturday morning he grabbed the wrong woman's wrist in a parking lot, and the thing that had always been underneath the surface of his life, the accountability he had been spending 15 years successfully avoiding, was already on its way before he ever straightened his jacket and got in his car. Lily is 9 months old. She has developed a strong preference for the color orange and a philosophical disagreement with nap time that Nora handles with a patience I recognize. She does not know yet what preceded her arrival in this world. She does not know about the parking lot, or the footage, or the courtroom, or the 18 years. She does not know that her grandfather drove home in silence. One Saturday afternoon, holding something very carefully, the way you hold something when you know that how you carry it matters as much as what you do with it. Someday she will ask. And when she does, I am going to tell her the truth, which is this. I followed every rule I knew, and I followed them precisely. And I followed them because the rules, when properly applied to a man who has spent his whole life convinced they were for other people, are not a ceiling. They are a demolition.